State Department officials say the president has all the authority he needs to wage war on ISIS. But many in Congress do not agree, and they want a new authorization for the use of military force. What about that? Correspondent Rich Edson is at the State Department tonight.
On September 18, 2001, President George W. Bush signed an authorization allowing his administration to use the U.S. military against those responsible for the terrorist attacks a week earlier. And over the last 16 years, the White House is still using that broadly written authorization as the legal basis to fight the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. And now the Trump administration has informed Congress it is seeking no changes to that 2001 resolution. In a closed hearing, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Defense Secretary James Mattis offered the administration's perspective on the military authorization before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, expanding on their earlier public statements.
But our mission and our purpose and reason for being in Syria is unchanged. We are there to defeat ISIS. And all of our efforts are focused on defeating ISIS, denying them of their caliphate.
In a letter to Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Corker, the State Department's Bureau of Legislative Affairs writes, quote, "The United States has sufficient legal authority to prosecute the campaign against al-Qaeda and associated forces, including against the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. The administration is not seeking revisions to the 2001 AUMF or additional authorizations to use force."
We never intended it to be used against ISIS in Syria. It was meant to deal with the threat to our country on 9/11. The organizations that exist today were not the organizations that were involved in the attack against our country on 9/11.
Critics of continued use of the 2001 authorization question its expansion to justify attacks against the Syrian government. In June, the U.S. shot down a Syrian fighter jet after it attacked U.S.-supported forces. In its letter, the State Department argues, quote, "The United States does not seek to fight the Syrian government. However, the United States will not hesitate to use necessary and proportionate force to defend U.S., coalition, or partner forces engaged in the campaign against ISIS." Secretary Mattis says a new authorization would be a statement of the American people's resolve, an argument senators say he stressed in today's briefing.
There's a sincere attempt, I think, particularly with what General Mattis was talking about, that it would provide, I think, some assurance to his troops.
Senators in that briefing say the administration is willing to work with Congress on a new authorization, and there are efforts on Capitol Hill to do so. But how to define the fight, limit it, or what powers to grant the president are still issues that could bog this down. Brett.
Rich, the U.S. Air Force has successfully tested that ICBM. Air Force saying it was not a direct response to North Korea and had been planned for a long time. But, of course, any one of these tests obviously directly deals with possible U.S. response to North Korea. At the same time, we are hearing about more U.S. pressure on China against North Korea. What about that?
Yeah, on multiple fronts here, Brett. The State Department is also talking about its pressure campaign. It wants China to do more to corral its ally, North Korea, on this. It says China has done significant steps, but it still needs to do much, much more. The United States wants China to enforce existing sanctions, add additional sanctions to North Korea. This is also on top of the Trump administration, according to a number of reports, that it's going to enforce or look to enforce certain retaliatory trade mechanisms for what the Chinese have done as far as intellectual property theft. The State Department official says that has been an issue between the United States and China for years, and that China's response thus far remains insufficient. This is also, as U.S. officials tell Fox News, that intelligence officials tracked a Chinese missile drill over the weekend that used mocked-up versions of U.S. artillery and U.S. stealth planes, and the official said that basically that was a message that Chinese were sending to the United States. Brett.
Rich Edson, live at the State Department. Rich, thank you.